Hey there, LinkedIn. Hey, it's Wednesday, 1 p.m. Central. Time for another live. Today, we're going to be looking at stories and specifically what happens in your brain when you hear a story, because it's fascinating. So, we're going to be looking at this through the lens of three different aspects of neuroscience, and we're going to be looking at it through two different stories. But before we get into that, let's talk about neuroscience a little bit. What exactly is neuroscience? Neuro meaning neuron, which is the cells of your brain, and science, which is the study of. So it's the study of cells in your brain. There's actually two types of your cells in your brain. There's the glia cells, which like make up that like pink tissue that you know of, and then there's the neurons, which are essentially like electrodes which fire back and forth. And neurons don't care much about the glias. They're like, glia wouldn't want to be you know what I mean? And if you think about it, your brain is essentially electricity and fluid, which is remarkable. Like that we aren't like zapping ourselves all over the place. But with stories, you do get zapped a little bit. And we're going to talk about what happens in your brain and body when you hear a story. So, first things first, three themes about neuroscience to get started. Number one, we're going to talk about a topic called neuroplasticity. Again, neuro meaning brain cells, plasticity in scientific terms means changing. So our brains change all the time. Our brains are changing continuously throughout the day. We are losing some cells, creating other cells, and we are essentially modifying what's happening in our brain all the time with our situations, with stories we're listening to, with what's happening around us, what we're thinking about happening around us changes. If you're on a beach, your body and brain react differently than if you are at the North Pole. But you can be on the North Pole, closing your eyes and visualizing yourself on the beach, and your brain feels like you're at the beach. It's crazy. So, we're going to talk about neuroplasticity, which is something that's leaned on a lot in storytelling. Next, we're going to talk about feelings. We all have them. Sometimes we even get more than one at a time. Looking at you fellas, myself included. I think that emotions really impact how our brains work. I don't think people really give enough credit to the fact that our brain is made up of something called a limbic system. Is one of the three parts of the brain. We'll get into that, how it connects with the feelings that we go through. So one of the things I want you to think about throughout today's topic is that when emotions are high, logic is low. When emotions are high, logic is low. Storytelling arouses some emotions with us. And so our prefrontal cortex, or the thinking part of our brains right in front here, is low. And so we'll get into that, and that ties into neuroplasticity. Last, I want to bring up the theme of a schema. Nerd talk here. So, schema is essentially a brain shortcut, if you will. It's a way that we make sense of the world without really knowing much information. A shortcut or a heuristic, if you will. You can see this in kids a lot. It's sometimes kind of funny, like I remember when my daughter was 1.5, maybe toddler age, right? Like toddling around. She could walk and run, but like didn't really know much and was pretty vulnerable to the world. And we were at the park, and I get to chit chat with people like I do. And I was chit chatting with some people, and I looked over and I was like, oh crap, Luella is running towards a I don't know, what would it be, a gaggle of geese, maybe? A whole like a grouping of them. There was maybe 40 Canada geese there, and they were about her height. And Canada geese are nasty, nasty birds, And so when you think of Canada geese, you have these shortcomings. You have shortcuts to think about a Canada goose. So when you think of it as an adult, when I say Canada goose, you may think of goose poop or honking or flying in a V or something like that. As a kid, she was like, oh, bird, want to touch it. Let me run towards it. And so she was running towards these geese, and the I could tell that like the elf male was like kind of going towards her like this, and was gonna take a bite out of her, which would have been terrible because they were like eye to eye, right? And so I ran over there and I picked her up, and this papa goose, bit me right in the ass. It like drew blood. Crazy. So like geese, don't mess with geese. But we do these kind of shortcuts all the time in our brains, and so we can lean on them and play with them with stories. And so we'll get into that. First, we're going to talk about a story. This is a story that happened to me last Thursday. I was at the cigar bar, like I like to do on Thursday nights, I guess. That's what dudes in sweaters do. We go to cigar bars with other dudes in sweaters, I guess, and watch Jeopardy reruns and things like that. So it was closing at 8, but they let us stay till 8:15 or whatever. I don't know why. So just as we were getting ready to go, there was like myself and maybe like 8 other guys. It's kind of like a living room setup. And on the big screen TV, there was a James Bond movie playing. So this is a James Bond movie. I don't know the name of it, but anyways, it was Sean Connery, and he pulls up on this awesome speedboat and he docks it. And as a Minnesotan, the first thing I thought of was like, that's not, you don't just run a boat into shore, dude. You got to like tie it up. But anyway, that's what he did. And he grabbed something from the back. What was it? A tuxedo, perfectly like pressed and tailored, no wrinkles. Like, how does that happen? He gets out of his scuba gear and puts on his tuxedo outfit. And what is he doing next? He's gambling. He's gambling at this like high stakes casino, and everyone's giving him the side like, hello, Mr. Bond. Like stuff like that. And so you're like, ooh, these are bad guys. I know. My brain knows these are bad guys. But James Bond is the good guy, right? Like I've already established that in my brain. I don't need to know anything more about anyone else or the fact that this is a movie, right? And so that's what I got going on in my brain. And so he's done gambling, and then someone comes over and says, Mr. Bond, we have made a complimentary room for you. So he's given a key card. So, or old key, sorry, not a key card, like the old-fashioned key. And so he goes to his room and he looks around because there's bad guys. We've already established that. And then he opens his room. Whoops, mistake. There's a babe showering in there. Uh-oh. And we're like, oh, this is going to get exciting. Like, what's going to happen here? And right then Marge comes by and turns the TV off. And we're all like, what? What's going on, Marge? Marge is the lady who works at the cigar bar. And we're like, what's going on, Marge? Why'd you turn it off? And she says, you know what's going to happen. We're like, I guess, yeah, we know what was going to happen. We just wanted to figure out, like, how exactly and like what were the awesome words that were going to be said, And so this story is ridiculous. James Bond isn't real. You don't beach a boat by beaching a boat. Like, who's going to show up? And then to grab a tuxedo of the back of a boat, and then suddenly you're in a casino and everyone recognizes you and you have tons of money and skill and you're winning. And you just so happen to be at the right table with like these villains that you don't know but need to run into from anywhere in the world. And then there's someone in your hotel room when you go in, like, this is absolutely ludicrous. But we were all hooked. And we're going to talk today about why we were all hooked. So first of all, when you're making a post on LinkedIn, the first thing that you do is you make a hook. The next part is going to be the body or the meat of your post. Last is going to be the call to action. And the hook. Why do hooks happen? Why do they work? What's so good about a hook anyway? Well, what happens is when we experience a world that's unlike ours, or a world that's different or a little askew from what we're used to, our brain says something's not right. Something is wrong here. Something's fishy. Something seems suspicious. And so dopamine is released. A lot of people think dopamine is the feel-good chemical. And that's true, but that's only one of its 5 functions. Its main function is arousal, or what we say, get ready. It's a part of our hypothalamus, I'm sorry, our hypothalamus is the very center of the limbic system. The limbic system is a part of your brain that connects with your spinal cord and your endocrine system, chemicals, think, all your hormones and things like that. So basically, your hypothalamus says we are not at homeostasis. Things are not what we expected. Things are different. Alert, not at homeostasis. Alert, alert. And that alert is dopamine. And it's released into your body. And it says, hey, we maybe need to move soon. So get ready, premotor cortex, the part of your brain that's in charge of movement. Get ready. Okay. Wake up from that nap. We're warming up. I know you're sitting at a cigar bar, but get ready to move, which is why your hands start to get sweaty when you watch something that's tense or a story that you are invested in. That's why our blood pressure raises when we're watching a scary movie, because the dopamine has said, be on alert. Also, what dopamine does is says, hey, brain, start to get going, because we're going to have to remember stuff here, okay? Important stuff is here. We know a lot about the world. We know everything about the world. But oh my goodness, now there's something new. So please be on high alert, brain. So dopamine triggers an increase in cognitive levels or thinking levels in our brain. And so that's why hooks work, because they start to get our emotions going. Dopamine is released, and so we get aroused in our body and in our brain. We get ready for movement. We get ready for taking in knowledge. We remember more when dopamine is in our body than when dopamine is not in our body. That's why hooks work, because they get our limbic system in our brain up and running. So how do you create an awesome hook? Create something different. That's why contrarian views are so cool. Why you're seen as an authoritative figure, someone with authority. If you can talk about something different, if you can say how I accomplished this awesome deed that before didn't seem to be making any sense, that happens. It's two lines that were parallel that you make somehow not parallel. You get someone to think in a slightly different way. Or in this James Bond world, you create this this new world, right? When James Bond movies start, they just start. There's usually no opening credits that happens kind of after the opening scene, if you will. They just start. It's the hook of the movie is, here's this new exciting world with these interesting characters and this big dilemma, and you've got to figure out what's going to happen to our bud James. That's why hooks work. They involve your brain. And then we move to the body of your post. And the body really is where emotions start to come into play. I know that you've heard about writing to your, avatar or lighthouse client or ICP, whatever you want to call it, writing to their pain points, right? If you can write to someone's needs, wants, goals, desires, you are playing into their emotional state. So what's happening with them, again, your hook created dopamine, which said, oh, alert, 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 we need to pay attention to this. Now what you're doing is you're involving emotions into it. And when emotions are involved with a story, we get attached to the characters. That's why, again, my hands were sweaty with James Bond. Why, when he looked behind, oh my goodness, are there any bad guys? I was like, is there a bad guy behind him? I've never been to Monaco. I've never been down that hallway. Is that even in Monaco? And besides, Sean Connery is just, he's got a twinkle in his eye reading the lines. It's not real. It's a completely falsified facade of real life that I'm invested in after 4 minutes. Partly because they're creating something that's new that I'm curious about, but also I'm getting connected to him. I don't want anything bad to happen to him. I like him. And so what's happening is oxytocin is released again from the hypothalamus in my endocrine system into my brain. And what oxytocin is it's the connection chemical. When you share a laugh with someone, Oxytocin. When you sit next to someone and they cry or experience emotion, oxytocin. When someone shares their goals with you or shares something that's maybe a deep trauma or tragedy in their life, oxytocin. All of that stuff happens because we feel connected to that person. This was created, we don't know why, but evolutionary biologists believe that the chemicals were created so that we could learn from our ancestors. Our brains are hardwired towards stories. They help us make sense of the world. They help us stay safe. And so if we are connected to the storyteller or connected to the characters in the story, we then can glean the information that the character learns and apply them to our own lives. So again, when emotions are high, logic is low. So oxytocin, creating a character, it could even be a reader itself, but in the future or in the past or whatever that might be, the oxytocin connects the reader to the character that you are writing about. Next, what you can do is you can write with visuals, because our motor cortex is already running. We're already ready to move, which is why when I'm watching James Bond or whatever scary movie that your body is tense. You're sometimes people when they go to movies they bring a blanket because they get cold. And the reason they get cold is because their circulation is all off. Their circulation is going to all of their limbs. They're getting ready for fight or flight because the story is that good that your brain is fooled and thinks that you're actually in it. And so you get more and more and more connected, more and more emotionally invested. Last, with the body, consider using visuals. Write about um, the beautiful orange and purple sunset. Write about someone, sipping hot tea from a computer mug. Delish. And all those kinds of things help connect you with the character. And creating these kinds of visuals help people's brains, come alive. Again, the hook was like, hey, get ready with your visuals. What you're doing is you are using kind of the warm up of the brain to get it thinking, to get it remembering your brand, remembering your words, thinking about what comes next. You are getting your reader more and more invested when you use visuals. Last, I want to talk about open loops, creating like curiosity. And the James Bond is awesome at creating open loops. So when he goes to the casino, he meets bad guys, but we don't know who they are. When he meets with like his headquarters with M, we know that there's bad guys and he has to solve the case, but we have no clue how. We find out about his cool gadgets, but we don't know how they're going to get used. We see him playing gambling, but we don't know if he's going to win or lose. We see that there's a woman showering in his hotel. We don't know what's going to happen next. Or if you're like Marge, you know what's going to happen next. But still, we want to know. We want to know why. And so our brains are just constantly thinking about what's next, what's next, what's next. So we're engaged. That's why we remember stories so well, because we're so cognitively engaged in them. We're trying to think of all sorts of different scenarios and things like that. But let's get into the third section here. Remember, schemas. Schemas are shortcuts. Our calls to action at the end of our post allows your reader the resolution of figuring out how to solve the puzzle. So again, you've hooked their interest. They're emotionally invested. Their brain is going crazy trying to figure out what the conclusion is. But again, emotions are high, so logic is down. And so you are going to spoon feed them the solution. You want to get more deals? I've got a lead generation masterclass for you. Oh, that must be the solution. You're looking to connect with more investors? Tell stories. Have them be the hero of their own story with your investment. Once you get this investment back and we multiply your equity by 3x, you'll be able to afford that beach house that you've always wanted to retire to. Oh, that sounds awesome. So you've piqued their interest, you've got them emotionally invested, and then you've spoon fed them the answer, which they are searching for and absolutely amenable to. Remember theme number one, neuroplasticity. Their brains are changing. And our brains are dumb and lazy and want every shortcut that you can possibly give us. So if you give them a call to action that is so simple and ties in with their pain points and helps them solve the problem of what do I do next, jackpot, you've done it. So why do CTAs work? Again, it's because our brains are so moldable. It's because we're already emotionally invested. All of our chemicals are saying, hey, there's no homeostasis here. Something is wrong. We better pay attention. That's awesome. Call to action is simple. Let's do it. Then what happens afterwards is our brain, again using shortcuts, says, because you helped us out, you must be valuable. You must be kind and generous. Not only that, you must be an authority figure because you know how to solve this. We assume James Bond is an authority figure because he knows how to solve those problems. But what we find out about actual James Bond is that dude's a wreck, total mess. I mean, if you knew James Bond in real life, you would probably not want to be buds with him, right? I mean, wherever he goes, there's chaos. He works alone. You know, all that kind of cool, mysterious stuff that we could never do but want. So that's why call to actions work so well. Last, I want to talk about one of my favorite movies ever, Inception. Inception does an incredible job of storytelling, of taking you through the hook and onto the body, and last with the call to action. And now Inception has such an interesting call to action. If you haven't seen it, it's a movie about dreams and a guy who goes through different stages of dreams. And at the end, the audience has to decide for themselves, is he still in a dream or is he in reality? So back to the hook. It catches you. Here's a guy who seemingly has it all together, but he is one like big job away from getting back to his family. Now, as we start to root for him more and invest more in the story, we realize maybe there's more to this story than meets the eye. He and his wife, do they really have a great relationship? She's dead now. Spoiler alert. Sorry, that movie came out like 20 years ago. You should have seen it by now. But like, and she's after him? Why? That's interesting. So they want to be together, but also not together. And how long has this been going on? And boy, this is like really important. We must be invested to help him solve that problem. And so he employs a bunch of other people to help him with this problem. And he spends all this time down in limbo, like thousands of years, just so that he can go back to the next level, to kick up to the next level, kick up to the next level. There's so much suspense. Are they all going to make it work so that when the van hits the water, that they all jolt back to life and then they're back on that airplane? It's so exciting. So many open loops. It's awesome. That story has played with us. They literally created open loops. That's what the whole movie is about. They're like, we know how your brains work. We're going to give it exactly to you. And then at the end, it's awesome. The call to action is he dreaming or is he in reality? And we're so involved with this. When I first saw it, I watched it with my old roommate, Tom, and we watched it. And I thought that, or I should say, Tom thought that he was still dreaming. And I said, I don't think it really matters because he made up his mind. Leo decided this is where I'm going to be. And I think that's what he was always searching for was like, hey, like, who am I? Just pick a lane, bro, and go, right? And so that's what I thought. But we got into kind of a heated discussion. I mean, we're arguing. At one point, Tom even like stood up like he was going to like punch me. And then like I stood up in retaliation. Why? because this movie that we watched for 2 hours created this world that we were so invested in that we were willing to argue and potentially fight about what we thought the correct answer was. Meanwhile, this is just a group of people who created a film to get us thinking. Our brains are dumb, but they think they're so smart. And with stories, it's how you bring it all together. It's how you teach with a little manipulation. It's how you connect with people by knowing a little bit about some trickery. It's how you get people invested in you and your brand and using that for good by arousing new possibilities within your audience. So, hey, I've enjoyed this story time. I hope you have too. And so, hey, we'll see you next Wednesday. In the meantime, go out there and tell some awesome stories. Change the world because we need you. Take care.